Good afternoon. My name is Jorn Weisbrod. I'm the Artistic Director of the Luminato Festival, and I'm very proud to welcome you to our first ever TimesTalks Luminato, which is actually the first TimesTalks in Canada. So you are experiencing a real premiere. I'm very, very proud that we have with us the great Robert Wilson, Willem Dafoe, the great actor, and John Rockwell, who's been a writer for the New York Times and the chief editor of the Arts and Leisure section for a long, long, long time. And it's wonderful to be here at the Isabel Bader Theater. I'm very proud of this relationship with the New York Times because this is not only going to stay here, but it's going to reach a complete new audience for the festival and bring sort of the name of the Luminato Festival and also Toronto into the rest of the world, because this talk is going to be live streamed through the New York Times webpage and also through our webpage. I'd like to take oh, great, yes, absolutely. I'd like to take a moment to briefly thank our wonderful sponsors who make the event, the whole Luminato Festival, happen. L'Oréal Canada, our partner in creativity, our founding government partner, the province of Ontario, and our major partner, the government of Canada. Yes, Ontario! And of course, all our individual donors, foundations, corporate, and other media partners that support this festival. It is really a great pleasure to be partnering with the New York Times on this, but there's more in this program. I actually just got a picture from our festival hub at David Pico Square, and some of you might have been there already. We have a new art installation there called 1000 Speculations, and if you wonder what that is, or if you speculate what that is, it is actually the world's largest mirror ball with 26 feet in diameter, and it's just risen into a height of 80 feet above ground and will slowly revolve. And tonight, for Maxi Priest at the Hub, it will also be lit up and really dazzle the entire city. Robert Wilson and Willem Dafoe are going to talk a lot, I think, about their first collaboration ever, which was on this production that premiered last night. And I have never seen such applause and standing ovations in my life here in Toronto, which arguably is not that long yet. I moved to Toronto a year and a half ago. But I really don't think that even Taylor Swift must have gotten a bigger applause than Willem Dafoe yesterday when he came on stage. Unfortunately, though, the production is sold out, so I hope that all of you have your tickets already. But there are still some tickets to have for the Mark Morris Dance Group with their wonderful, wonderful piece L'Allegro at the Sony Center, which opens on Friday. Fang Yiting by Toronto's Adam Agoyan, who's also doing a TimesTalk tomorrow afternoon at 2 p.m., which opens on Thursday. And I also encourage you to come and see the Daisy Theater by Ronnie Burkett, who is a wonderful marionette artist from Toronto. It's every night of the festival at 9:30 at the Berkeley Street Theater, followed by, at 11:30, Jason Collette's Courtyard Revue, where he mixes music, spoken word, poetry, and invited artists from the festival and invited artists from Toronto to create really what I call sort of a festival within the festival. I'd like to now introduce you to Carol Day from the New York Times, and before she comes on stage, she's almost there, I also want to say that Luminato, we have our own newspaper now too, which you might know, which is called Light News. It's sort of our version or our idea of the perfect art section, and it comes out every day of the festival. You can pick it up at the Festival Hub, and today we have this amazing reverse Proustian questionnaire with Carrie Fisher, where we give the answers and she has to ask the questions. So look out for that. It's actually really, really funny. But here's Carol Day from the New York Times. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Jorn. The New York Times is very excited to be here in Toronto for the Luminato Festival, and we're honored to be a part of it, to work with Jorn and all of the people who've been putting it together. It's also great for us, and I hope for everyone who sees the productions, to be able to have them on nytimes.com/artsbeat, which is our arts blog. and to bring our journalists to Toronto. Today we have John Rockwell, who has a long and very illustrious career at the Times and still contributes for the paper. And of course, as Jorn said, our two great guests, Robert Wilson and Willem Dafoe. So please join us in welcoming John Rockwell, Willem Dafoe, and Robert Wilson.
Thank you.
Hi, John, Willem, Bob. In case you're wondering. The format of this, it's already 2:22. The format of this is it's going to be over at 3:30 and we all have to scatter in different directions. But so the last 20, 25 minutes of it will be questions from you guys to the extent that you have them. And if you want to ask a question, what you have to do is line up at one of these two microphones at either ends of the side aisles and ask your questions. And then you will A, be heard by the others in the audience, and B, be picked up by the streaming mechanisms. Prior to that, we're going to talk. Behind you are a series of stills in sequence that they appear in the show, The Life and Death of Marina Abramovic, but we're not going to comment individually on them. And they'll run through about a minute of photo, and then they'll cut out, you'll get the TimesTalks logo. So our conversation will be about you guys. And why don't we start with simply asking how this piece, The Life and Death of Marina Abramovic, came about?
In the early 70s, I met Marina in Belgrade. And since that time, we had talked about working together. And at the end of the 60s in New York at the Whitney Museum of American Art, there was an exhibition that was a summation of the art from the 60s. It was called Art Against or Without Illusion. And I thought a lot about that, and I thought, well, what's wrong with illusion? And I had been a part of the performance art scene in New York and performing in alleyways and galleries, Judson Church, and various venues, found spaces. And I decided that I wanted to go into the proscenium arch, the traditional theater, and where the space is really two-dimensional, where there's a side that's hidden and a side facing the audience, and very different than performing where something is viewed 360 degrees. And through the years, Marina from time to time would ask me if I would like to collaborate with her on her work and do something with her. And I always said, well, I'd really gone in a different direction. I was not interested in performing in a museum or a found space, that I had gone into the proscenium box and was interested in a formal theater where one thought about speech and light and makeup and costume, and the whole world was very artificial. And Marina was really interested in something that was very real. And some years ago, she approached me again and she said, would I direct a work about her life? And at first I was very reluctant. And I said, well, if I did, I would like to put it in an opera house, in a proscenium stage. And she wanted to be in it. And I said, but you know, Marina, this would be a completely different experience for you. I mean, it would be, 2 hours of makeup, and you have to think about how you walk on stage, how you speak, and etc. Anyway, so I was really hesitant, and then she called me again. She said, there's another thing I'd like to ask you. She said, would you design my funeral? I said, I want to be buried in Belgrade, Amsterdam, and New York, and the service to happen at the same time. There'd be 3 bodies, and no one would know who the real one is. So I said, wow, that sounds like a great idea, and why don't we I'd accept to do the life and death of Marina Abramovic, and we could start with your funeral. She said, great, then I can see what it'll look like. So I've been a very big admirer of Willem's for many years, and from time to time we would meet and talked about possibly working together. And so I immediately said, and I would like to work with Willem. And she said, oh, that's great, I know him and admire him. So that's pretty much how it started.
But then how did Anthony get involved?
Well, I was at a dinner at Marina's, and Anthony was there, and I said, God, it'd be great if we could get Anthony in the piece too. And she said, oh yeah, he has to be. And what was very interesting for me is that in reading through Marina's diaries and journals and her notes about her life, I said a lot of the subject matter is very dark and cruel, and my God, if we could hear Anthony's voice rendering her life, and this angelic, otherworldly voice would bring light to the darkness. And so that's how she said, oh, that would be great, and so we invited him to be a part of it.
I mean, I'm not coming fresh off last night. I saw the world premiere a year ago in Madrid, so I'm speaking more generally. But what struck me then was how you had taken such amazingly disparate elements. I mean, an incredibly vivid actor, very practiced on the stage, knowing pretty much what he's doing, although you may think you're winging it every moment, nonetheless. No. And Anthony, who, you know, has given concerts but has no stage experience that I know of, and Marina, who is a performance artist, has been in the public for decades, but is not a performer.
Not a performer, doesn't know the
and
theater.
yet the whole thing gets sort of knit together into something that makes a kind of coherent sense. I mean, was that difficult to do?
Yes. I think it's what makes it rich and interesting, because you have all these different edges. We have a group of young performing artists in the work too, and so they have no theater background. So it reminds me a little bit of some of my early work where I worked with non-professionals, but something else happens. And I think what is always very important for anyone being on stage, whether you have, you know, experience on the stage like Willem and great vocal techniques and really knows an audience and what it's like to be on stage, knows light, and or someone who doesn't, is that you somehow are comfortable with yourself. And if you're comfortable with yourself on stage, it's easier to relate to the public. And so that's sort of a key with these people who don't have as much experience being on the stage, is to find some way where they could be themselves, being in the context of my work. And,
I mean, I will now advance a theory I have about Robert Wilson, which Robert Wilson is free to reject angrily. And that is that, you know, what strikes an audience a lot about your work is how formal, classical, and almost controlled it is. You know, take 3.5 steps to the left, hit the mark with the light on your hand. Everything is extremely designed, and it's a visual experience. And yet, for me, the most successful works of yours have been ones involving strong personalities like Willem Dafoe, who play by your rules, but bring a vividness of their own personality to it and set up a kind of contrast and tension of individuality versus formality. I mean, do you buy that theory?
yes, that's exactly. What I do as a director, I give formal directions. I think in 45 years or longer in working in the theater, I've never, ever told an actor or a singer what to think. I give formal directions, quicker, slower, look a little higher, turn your head a little bit to the right. No, that's too much. There. More space under your arms. Feel the space in back of you. Formal directions, smoother, rougher. Attack this. So you get a frame, but the frame is not important. It's how you fill in the frame. And very often with my work, it's difficult for the participant to feel free in the form. But if you can get free in the form, then you can fill it in. And that's what's important, is how you feel in that form. And so maybe I will say in terms of text or something, think the opposite of what you're saying. Or, if you've got something very mean, smile, or whatever, I don't know. But I give a frame, a form, and the filling in is up to the actor to do.
And from your perspective, do you feel that the same thing, that it's an interesting challenge or excitement to fill out that frame?
Very much. I think that's basically what my job is in any kind of performing. And the great thing that I like working with Bob is he's got such a refined language. He's got such a refined... I think the formal theater is an essential theater. I respond much more to doing things than interpreting things. So he gives me a language, so I don't waste a certain kind, a vocabulary, a physical vocabulary, a way of being on stage that doesn't make, it gives me more energy to invest it rather than to find it. So he makes a beautiful design for me, and then it's my job to animate it, to live in it, and sometimes change it because of a limitation I have or an inspiration I have, and that's a wonderful way to work.
Yeah, I over the years, the people who have really been effusive about working with you have been the strongest performers. I mean, people like Jesse Norman or Sylvie Guillem or people like that who just can do exactly what you're saying, can bring their own personalities to it and yet fit within the overall context. And the ones who are less successful with his work, I remember once doing a story about you, and we were in Hamburg and you were doing Parsifal.
Yes.
And you looked up at the stage and there was some woman up there, and you said to me, "Look at her, she looks like she's waiting for a bus." The woman was just, she was technically doing everything Bob had said to do, stand there in this position, but she brought nothing to it. Yeah. And but the ones who do bring something to it are what makes the whole thing fly. Somebody had said that this is your first collaboration, but wasn't one of those Voom video portraits, didn't that precede this?
Yes, I did. I made...
Just tell them what the Voom video portraits are, first of all.
I made about 60 portraits that are like still lifes that are alive. Usually it's involved in stillness, and they're very formal. It's the movement that one discovers in stillness. Sometimes when we're very still, we are more aware of movement than when we make a lot of movement. They're built around the personalities of the subject. I've done celebrities, I did royalty, I did people on the street, I did animals.
Animals, great animals. I love design.
Athletes. So they're on flat screens. They're frequently almost life-size.
And they're projected in gallery shows, right? Or on big screens. I don't know how it works, but
it's like a painting. There's many hours of lighting it, and but it's alive. And so, like a window in a room. I did a series of portraits of owls. So that this owl we filmed an owl for about 15 hours, just sitting there, and then selected different takes. So it's like having a pet. You don't have to feed it. You don't have to clean the cage. You know.
How did it feel to be a pet when you did yours?
I'm happy to be a pet.
What was yours? I mean, what did he have you doing in this thing?
You know, actually, I remember showing up, and immediately before Bob even arrived, he had an idea about the makeup. And they put a mask on me, basically. And it was a monster, basically. And I thought, okay.
But could you see your face, or were you hidden behind this mask?
No, but I hid behind the mask. But then I got there, and we started working, and it was like in miniature, the work that we've done together since. It was really a good sampling of what it was like to work with Bob. And that was like an afternoon. But I loved it. It was kind of a call and response. He'd throw out things, I'd do, there would be an adjustment. He would adjust, I would adjust. It was back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Occasionally, he would also come up and show me, and I would copy him. And I loved that. And it basically was an afternoon to find a gesture and to find a way of being along with the architecture of what was happening and the scenic elements. But it was a beautiful little snapshot of what it was like to work with him, so that whetted my appetite even more.
Yeah, I sat through an afternoon when you were doing William Popel.
Oh, yeah.
And it was really amazing. Yeah, you had him. Do you ever see that one? The one he's lying down in white jockey underbriefs, and
Do you know Popel? He's an Afro-American, very political artist. Crawled on his stomach from Lower Manhattan to Harlem with nigger written on his back. And I did a portrait of him. I painted him all white.
But what was amazing was just it was a little workshop in Wilsonian methodology, because, he had little fake pine trees and had set elements, and poor old Popel was just sort of lying there, and he would have some guy move the third pine tree half an inch to the left, and, all this kind of detail. It was really, really interesting. You guys are busily at work now on another project that's going to get its premiere at the Manchester International Festival next month, and then it's going to go to Spoleto and Paris and somewhere else, and hopefully maybe to New York. But and it's with you and Baryshnikov, and it's The Good Woman. Can you talk something about that?
The Old Woman.
Old Woman, sorry. Good woman of Sichuan. What do I?
Well, it's a very strange text that was written in the late 30s by a Russian writer, Daniel Karms. I was particularly attracted to it because you can't really follow any one clear storyline. In the sense, it's a text of nonsense that makes its own sense. I perform it with two people. It could be, I guess, a text that could be done with more people, or it could be as a monologue. It's a little bit the same challenge of doing a work like this. If you just read the text that Marina has written about her life, you have no idea how to stage it. Sometimes they're just lists. So, so it gives a kind of freedom for the director and for the actor to invent a theatrical presentation, or create a theatrical language with the material. And this play invites that kind of imagination.
Did you come across the story, or did Baryshnikov come across it first?
Well, Misha and I also have been talking for a number of years about doing something together, And he very much wanted to do a Russian text. So we were thinking about doing one of the famous texts, The Idiot or something. I was a little hesitant to do that. I don't know exactly why, but it just didn't feel right. And we worked with a dramaturg, Wolfgang Wiens, who worked with us a lot in shaping this work. And Wolfgang came up with this text, which is not really known, it's obscure, and was presented to Misha, and he immediately liked it. He liked it, I guess, for many reasons, but one of the reasons is that it could be discovered. And this writer, Daniel Corms, is just beginning to get undue recognition as an author.
And are there roles in it that Baryshnikov plays one and Dafoe plays another, or how does that work?
There are many roles, and it's never really clear. They switch, and so there is the old woman, and she's dead, and then she's speaking, and it's a kind of, how do you play a dead person? So you have to create another world. It's not something you do in a naturalistic way, thank God. And I hate naturalism. To me, to be on stage is something artificial. And if you try to, act natural, it always seems to be a lie. To be on stage is, the light is different, the way you walk is different, the way you speak is different, texts are different. And so this is something completely artificial. And sometimes Misha and Willem say the same text, and under different situations. And in my mind, I don't know how it is for Willem, they're both the author, so that they can be any of the characters in the situation. Maybe.
I remember I said yes, I'd be happy to work with you again, and Misha, that's exciting. I've always admired that he's done many different things in his career, and certainly a great dancer, great performer, so I thought this is very exciting. They give me the text. I like it very much. Something about it smells good, but I don't know what it is. And it's A and B, A and B, A and B, A and B. And I want to prepare. There's no real way to prepare except for to read the works of this author. So I do some of that, and then I send an email to Bob and say, Bob, any thoughts? I'd like to learn the text before we start workshopping. Am I A? Am I B? He says, I don't know. And in fact, I just sort of learned all the text and then I had to relearn it. But, that you don't know. There's no way to prepare.
I have several questions about you and theater and so forth, but before I sort of transition to that, one more Abramovic question, which is, what is your character in that anyhow? Are you a devil? Are you a trickster? What are you?
All of the above? I don't know.
Right.
It's a fluid thing. I'm a function. I'm a thing. And the truth is, I like being a thing. I like being a force, because then it's more flexible. You don't, it doesn't remind you of anything. I mean, of course it does. People are going to say, oh, that makeup's like the Joker, but that's a lazy imagination, if you ask me.
He's also a force.
So, I don't know. I don't know what I am. I know what I do in the show, and, I just sort of surf that wave.
And I think if you did know, then there would be no reason to do it. That's the reason to work, is to say, what is it? And if you can always stay open, then you can continue to think about it long after you've done it. And I think that's one of the dilemmas very often in theater. It's like bad high school teacher. They're saying, this is what it is, instead of saying, what is it? What is it that I'm saying? And if you can approach that every night, then you stay open. You can have a real dialogue with the public instead of trying to lecture to them, what to think and what the situation is. So I think that's what's brilliant about Willem. He just says, I don't know. It's great.
Bob, given your often stated feelings of disdain for naturalism, and given your career, which has gone back and forth between film and theater, especially the Worcester Group, God knows there's an element of naturalism in theater and there's an element of stylization in film, but on the whole, especially bigger films, or all films, tend to be more naturalistic, and stage tends to be more stylized. Is there anything about any of your work, particularly the Worcester Group, that sort of segued neatly into working with Bob?
I think probably the simplest. I think it's, I learned to approach things by doing actions and doing them in a graceful way and doing them in a way that, I could invest them with a kind of concentration that's not everyday concentration. I could give them a certain kind of attention that would open something very recognizable or very simple up to a sense of wonder or curiosity. And I think with the Worcester Group, I had some training with that in the respect that we weren't interpreters of texts. We were making things. We were people locked in a room, always making things as if we were going to perform that evening. So it was about your relationship to doing things.
And did those techniques, transfer to your work in film? Do you
Absolutely.
you don't see a sharp divide between the...
I could go on forever, the differences, but, it's sort of like the other day I was thinking, I think film, in some ways, film you capture, in theater you conjure.
Right.
And that's a big difference, because in theater you're going back to the same thing over and over again, and you get very practiced at reanimating things, reconsidering something that is familiar. You make a score and you try to get inside the note, and once you get inside the note, then the note starts to play you, ideally. With film, I love doing film, but often you are dealing with first impulse. And first impulse, best impulse, sometimes, but you never get to sit with things for very long. Plus, of course, as an actor, what you're doing is mediated by many hands, where in the theater, you're driving. Whether Bob has even shown me a section and I'm basically copying his choreography, I'm still driving when I'm on the stage, and how I do those actions is the performance.
Now, Bob, you said that you had, in the late 60s, sort of rebelled against 360-degree performance art and wanted to go to a proscenium stage. Well, the Worcester Group doesn't always strictly perform, but it's a theatrical company. Mm-hmm. So in a sense, the Worcester Group and your work sort of parallel each other in downtown New York. Was there crosstalk between Liz LeCompte and you and the Worcester people on the one hand and Bob on the other, or was it simply sort of parallel worlds back in the 70s, say?
I think we were aware of each other's work. We were working in the same neighborhood in Lower Manhattan and what became Soho. We always admired the Worcester Group and what they were doing, and thought it was more parallel, I think.
Yeah. But, Liz was a great admirer of Bob, and yeah, we were very aware, but doing very different things. He was already doing, we were in this dirty little theater downtown for many, many years, and he was off to Europe, and also, self-producing on Broadway, that sort of thing. It felt like a different world. We felt like kids.
Well, you're also about 10 years apart, and you really got going in late 60s, early 70s. When did the Worcester Group really get underway?
Worcester Group grew out of a group called the Performance Group. Officially, Elizabeth LeCompte started in 75, and I started working with them in 77.
All right, so it's a little later. But
Yeah, a
not
little
much.
later.
Yeah. Now I have to pull out my exhaustive research on you, which consisted of surfing the internet for a while. But
Don't believe what you read.
well, there was an interview with you in which you defined the center thing of theater as ritual and religiosity.
Oh, God.
And I rather like that, especially
That
as
must
it
have been a
relates to
certain
Bob.
period in my life.
This was not such an old interview. Come on, give me a break. But I mean, do you stick with that? I mean, I see a parallel between that and what Bob does, of course.
No, I do. Because I'm a sucker for this thing that I've said already 3 times here, of reanimating something. We do it in our life all the time. And if you develop an ability to do it, it just opens doors to you. It opens doors of thinking and doors of sensitivity. So I don't want to say, doors of perception. I don't want to say it's therapy. It isn't. I mean, it's a profession, it's work, but it, this is where I do it because of a certain kind of pleasure.
Bob, you'll pardon me, but I have to ask Willem one quick question. Which is not related to you, and it comes from me having written a book about Lars von Trier, which is what was it like? You've made now 2 big feature
3,
films.
actually.
3. What
3.
was it? Antichrist, Nymphomaniac, and what else?
Manderley.
I didn't know you. Anyway, what was? I mean, in
remarkable.
brief, what was it like working with the guy?
I love working with him. He's someone that really plays with the form. He's smart. He's got a devilish impulse to challenge himself and challenge people. And he also believes that actors are best when they're off balance. When they're working from a place of not knowing and they're struggling. He's a guy that prohibits rehearsal because he doesn't want actors to get their thing together and then come marching onto the set and do their thing. It's sort of just the opposite of Bob.
Sounds like it.
But he's real stimulating to be around. He's scary to be around. He's funny. I really enjoy him. And I think he makes very, very strong films.
I'm a big admirer. I mean, I spent some time with him when I wrote this book. The book was more about The Idiots, the movie The Idiots.
Yeah, that was an interesting
Well,
movie.
the last 20 minutes of it are just overwhelming. The rest of it is kind of a gaggy setup for the end. But the end is unbelievable, in my opinion. And, when she finally finds her inner idiot.
Yeah.
And
I like the setup, too.
What?
I like that awful setup
well, I mean,
that you're talking
the
about.
setup is funny and interesting and often moving, but it doesn't even get there. I mean, his movies often end amazingly. Antichrist, for example.
It's true.
So I haven't seen Nymphomaniac, so I can't speak for that one.
Nor have I.
But anyhow, I mean, sorry. This was well. I mean,
It's
that's
not out yet.
That's another thing that happens with film. I mean, you don't have control over the final product.
I certainly don't, no.
So in that sense, it's not at all surprising that you wouldn't have seen it. Anyway, back to the subject at hand. I didn't mean to go off onto the Lars von Trier tangent. Although, Bob, I think that you would find. Have you seen any of his movies?
Yeah, I have.
I mean, you guys aren't that far apart. Maybe the methods are different, but there's, I don't know. I mean, maybe it's just that I admire you both.
Well, I don't know. I think that the first time you do something is spontaneous. So if I want to repeat that, wow, it's a lot of work. And you have to do it, many times so it can be free again. And so, I don't know, it's like the first time you do something has that spontaneity, the freedom. And in my work, in order to get it free of the form, you have to become mechanical. You have to just do it and do it and do it and do it and do it, till you don't have to think so much about it. It's like riding a bicycle. First time you do it, it's awkward, but after a while, you don't have to think about it. Or my mother said she liked typing on a keyboard because it gave her time to think. but she could just do it. It was mechanical. So I think that when you become completely mechanical, you can be free. And so often, again, I see something that happens the first time, or I do something, or I see an actor do something, wow, that's it. And so maybe in the long run, it's not so far from just capturing those first moments and then trying to get back to them after a long, boring rehearsal period. We're doing it over and over.
But I mean, also, Von Trier is purely spontaneous. I mean, for example, for the Idiots, he had all those people sort of living together in a communal situation to sort of set up the, so I mean, it's not like we come together and, okay, this afternoon we make the movie. It's not like that.
No, he's very well prepared, but you don't block out the scenes. For example, from a scenography point of view and from a cinematic point, from the photography point of view, he's very well prepared. He knows his shots. He knows how. He does a lot of interesting technical treatments of things. He knows that very much.
But for the
it's
actors,
really about the actors.
I get it.
He wants to keep them in the dark.
Have you two discussed any projects beyond The Old Woman?
One thing at a time.
Okay.
It's got a. Right now we open on July 4th, the Old Woman, so we have, you should not listen to this, but we have 3 days of rehearsal before we preview, so
Hey, it'll be a spontaneous experience like Lars von Trier.
I'm afraid it might be. This may be it.
I don't know why I'm laughing. I should be crying.
And after the inevitable triumph of The Old Woman, what's in your date book for beyond that? I mean, do you have more plays or more films? Or
Me?
Yeah.
I'll do this show, Life and Death,
In New York in
in
December.
New York, and we'll tour with The Old Woman. To what extent, we don't know. We got to finish it first. Some movies, nothing to talk about until they get made. Some movies coming out. I mean,
Coming out
I
or
like
coming
to
up
work.
to shoot? Both.
Coming out in the fall, like 3 or 4.
No. It's funny about Hollywood. You make all these movies
Hey,
over a year, and then they all come out at once.
It's true. And, even I work in that, I'm in that line of work, and sometimes I see a friend, and I say, what's with you, You never stop, and they say, oh, that movie's from 2 years ago, it's just coming on now, this one was only 2 weeks of shooting, this one, so.
Right. And Bob, I mean, I read with some interest, since I didn't know it before, in the Pomegranate Arts newsletter that comes out, that you now have Paris dates for Einstein.
We're going to do Einstein on the Beach in Paris in January. So.
And will that be you always wanted it to end in Paris. Will that be it, or is there talk of more stuff beyond that?
There's a little chance that it maybe go to Argentina, and looking quite possible now that it'd go to Berlin just after Paris. Einstein was commissioned by the French government in 1976 by Michel Guy, who was the Minister of Culture. And so it started in France, and it looked as if it was not going to be, this revival was not going to go to France. But a few weeks ago, we found a way to do it, and I very much wanted it to happen because the French had commissioned it, had created it, and I felt that it was just right that it
Well,
go.
this revival also started in Montpellier, right? I mean,
It did, that's right.
and now, not that I wish to tug at your future ephemera too hard. Forget that metaphor. But what is this Brazilian project that people keep mentioning that you and Phil were going to do, or are going to do, or may do, or whatever the heck it is?
For many, many, many years ago, Phil and I were talking about doing a work called The Palace of Arabian Nights. And so there was some discussion about doing it in Brazil, but I think that's not going to happen now. We did a work called The White Raven, as you well know, John, and that was taking the explorers from the end of the Renaissance going into the future, the discovery of Americas from Portugal, and we wanted to go back to the 9th century and trace the Islamic movement to the Renaissance and the Palace of Arabian Nights. So that work is still on our books, and there's several possibilities now where that might happen. Maybe
You mean it might happen somewhere else, or something else might happen in
somewhere
Brazil?
else, and now the Brazilian project, we're thinking about something else, but that would not be with Phil.
I see.
But it looks like I'm going to do Bonnie and Clyde.
Bonnie and Clyde as what? A play, a musical,
As
opera?
a musical with Tom Waits.
Cool. What's next, Thelma and Louise?
Tristan in 2017 with
Right,
Barenborn
in Berlin, right, yeah.
in Berlin.
Yeah, we were talking about this last night. I think that's the last major Wagner, well, Emma, hold on. Did you ever do a Dutchman?
No, I haven't done.
All right, so
I did
okay.
The Ring and
And you
Parsifal, Lohengrin.
Hold on, I never did Meistersinger either, so forget this theory about last. But anyway, Tristan sounds to me like up your alley, but what do I know? You know, of all your other projects, I mean, this guy has so many projects with furniture design and video and fashion installations and theater and staging the classic C.F. Tristan and making your own work. Is there anything else what's happening with the evolution of the archive, museum, et cetera, at Watermill?
Well,
Watermill is his center out on Long Island.
what I now want to do is to build a library. And I call it the Library of Inspiration. And I was thinking in the past years that we don't really have to know history any longer because it's in a computer. We don't really need to know math because it's in a computer. But what can't we replace? And I think intuition. So I've been thinking about creating a library of inspiration. And a couple of years ago, I met Carol Mandel, who is the Dean of Libraries at New York University. And she had spent 2.5 years studying a library for the 21st century for New York University. And after this 2.5 years study, came to the conclusion that what they really wanted to implement couldn't be done at NYU because they were too large of an institution. So NYU is going to join the Watermill Center now and exploring this idea of a library for our time. It's a living library. So
Which would be out at Watermill?
would be out at Watermill. So it could be in the kitchen, it can be in the bedroom, it can be anywhere. And it involves many things, from bound volumes to the electronic media to living with art, with an art collection, references to it, and an internet globally. That's my big...
As someone who has spent some time observing Bob work, I can attest to this idea of a library of inspiration just in your own life. I mean, when you're doing a production, there's a big table and there's piles of books. And I mean, I remember when what were you doing? You were doing Four Saints and Three Acts, I think, when, you know, I did it, it was down in Houston, but I wound up doing it at the Lincoln Center Festival. And there were these books about every Javanese, you know, the ornamentation and architecture and all kinds of things, none of which directly fed into the work at hand, but all of which served as inspiration. And you've been out at Watermill. I mean, the place.
I haven't.
Oh, you should go because the place is just an amazing collection of world art everywhere you look. And obviously that serves an inspirational function for you, Bob. I mean, it must.
Well, I went to an art school. I went to Pratt Institute in Brooklyn, and there was no art. And if I wanted to see contemporary art, I went to MoMA or the Whitney. If I wanted to see classical art, I went to the Frick or the Met. But so here's a cultural institution where you really can live with artworks, and a kind of one of the ways we know about society is through the individual. And one way we understand the individual is through the history of art. And one of the few things that remains throughout time, we all know, is what the artists do. 5,000 years from now, no one is going to think about the war in Iraq or Afghanistan, probably, but they will be probably looking at what the artists are doing today. The artists are the diaries, the records, the journals of our time. It's one of the few things that remain. So here we can live with the history of man through art. And it's a center that is it's a laboratory for performance art and supporting creation and new work. And right now I'm 71, so it's great that I can now try to support young and emerging artists and try to help place their work in the world. Some of the people performing and The Life and Death of Marina are people who started at Watermill as young people. There's an actor that came when he was 17 years old as a student from New York and has sort of grown up, and now he's performing professionally in this work. I always say with the Watermill Center, we must do what no one else is doing. So if they're doing it somewhere else, there's no reason for us to do it. The challenge is to do what no one else is doing. So if they're doing it at Harvard or Yale or Northwestern or University of Toronto.
Okay, we have 20 plus minutes. I think the time has come, according to our masters at TimesTalks, to invite you guys to ask questions, preferably not give speeches, but ask questions. So if anybody would like to do this, there's always shyness at first and people don't line up, but we have microphones here and here, and come to them, and we'll go back and forth and see what you have to ask. You're first.
Well, thank you so much. Enjoyed this tremendously. My question is about reception, audience reception. And I want to ask about Portugal. I'm not sure if Willem Dafoe, if you were there when they did Three Sisters Wooster Group in Lisbon.
Yeah.
Yes, I saw it.
Not in Lisbon.
No, I didn't see you then.
No,
But-
but I made that piece with him, and I worked with
You stated
in that piece a lot.
you weren't there when they did it in Lisbon, or you didn't do it in Lisbon, the piece was done somewhere else in Portugal, or what are you saying?
I'm saying they probably performed it after I left the Worcester group,
Okay.
or it was a rare date where I wasn't able to tour.
Well, but I was introduced to the Wooster Group there, and I'm wondering about how you feel about reception of your work, Mr. Wilson and Mr. Dafoe, about reception of your work
Reception of your work.
in Europe, in Portugal specifically, or I'll accept Spain if you haven't been to Portugal, Madrid. If you can talk about that, please.
The reception of my work in Portugal, I think it was okay. It's been more difficult in New York, where I live. As John said, I made a piece called A Letter for Queen Victoria. And at that time, sort of all the artists doing performance pieces were performing in churches and galleries. I wanted to go on Broadway, so I said, okay, I'll rent a Broadway theater and try to produce it, and I did, and it was a disaster. And,
Kind of a cool piece, but a disaster.
there was a little blue-haired lady from New Jersey who came to see it. She bought a ticket, A Letter for Queen Victoria, And she stayed 20 minutes, and after 20 minutes, she got up and left, and she said to the usher, she said, "Honey, I know it's a turkey, but what does it mean?" My sister came to see a work of mine. She said, "I don't know how you get away with all that." So
Bob is from Texas.
I think in Portugal it was better received than here in the United
But
States.
in Spain, where this piece, Marina Abramovic, was premiered, and where I saw it at the Teatro Real in Madrid, it was a huge hit. So.
It was amazing. We were in the Opera House in Madrid. Can you believe it? For 10 performances or 2 weeks, every night sold out. In Madrid, the Opera House is rather, the public's rather conservative, but this hit was a hit. I mean, I was so shocked.
But it was not the same crowd. It was not the Spanish equivalent of the blue-haired ladies.
No, you had people coming to the Opera House that had never been there. There was a whole new audience. It's like when we did Einstein on the Beach at the Metropolitan Opera. They had never had such an audience at the Met. And that's always what I've fought for, is to try to put what I was doing or have a place in the mainstream of theater, to have a spectrum of all different kinds of offerings. And
This piece in particular attracts such a varied crowd. I mean, each of the components has their own audience. You have your audience, Bob has his, Marina has her, and Anthony has his.
Anthony has his, yeah.
And so different people come, but specifically Portugal, I don't know. You had a question?
Hi, my question is for Mr. Wilson. I was just wondering if you could, well, I went through the MAI prototype last night, and it sort of defines all of Marina Abramovic's various methods, and they're not exactly rigid, but they are very clearly defined. And I had seen you speak at the Guggenheim after your Works in Process series, and you had said, that there is watermelon, that you foster new performance, but there's not a Robert Wilson way of doing things. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about your collaboration with her and your experience of that collaboration.
With Marina?
Yes.
Well, Marina's a visual artist, and I'm a visual artist. As I said, I mean, Marina had never really done a work like this. She won the Golden Lion Venice for sitting in a room with raw meat, for months, this room with this smelly meat. And actually, she had asked me if I'd like to perform with her in that work, and I said, no, I would never sit in a room with all that smelly meat. It's okay for you to do it, but I'm not going to do it. And then she was horrified that I opened this piece with raw meat on stage, but it's plastic, and I light it red, and it's not real. She wanted it to be real. She sits on a block of ice, and it's plastic. She says, well, I want to sit on a real block of ice. I want to feel the cold block of ice. She says, no, your dress will get wet. I don't care. I want to sit on real ice. So it took some time.
Yeah.
For Mr. Dafoe, I was wondering if you could say a little bit about the physical demands of performing in the work. And for Mr. Wilson, I was wondering if you could, about when you're creating or rehearsing the work, what your proximity is to the actors on the stage. Do you like to be in there, or do you prefer the distance?
Well, if I had to work with this man here, I would look at him and try to think, what would be right for his body and for his look. And if he was going to do the part Willem is doing, it would be completely different. So I sort of make it on the personality of the person. So if I was working with you and not Marina, I mean, it would probably the role would be very different if you were playing Marina's mother. And often when I go back with a work, say, that's in repertory, if the actor has changed, then I change the direction somewhat based on the personality of the performer. So As a director, I very much look at the people that are there, and what I've learned in my old age is to go to the rehearsal room with no ideas. To go with a blank book. I used to, when I was younger, always think, if I don't think about what I'm going to do ahead of time, I won't know what to do. But then I realized that I would go to the rehearsal room, and then I was trying to make what was in my head, instead of saying, okay, I've got two people standing here, and my God, I mean, it's interesting just looking at the two of you. So let's start there. Now, what do I do next? Okay, well, your head is going like this, and his is doing that. I don't know. And let the room or people talk to me instead of me talking to them. So I very much work like a choreographer or something, in a room making something. I don't like to go and talk about things.
But you also, as you mentioned, you sometimes go down on stage and do the movements or the thing yourself.
I very often do all the parts. I mean, if I'm directing an opera, I usually, Madame Butterfly, I did every part. I did all the butterfly. I get it in my body.
I'd love to see him as trouble.
But I know that when I'm doing Butterfly, that I've got this singer there, and I see her, and I think about her when I'm doing it. So that, if I had someone else, I would be doing it with a different image in mind. But it's not just me being me, but it's me trying to think about someone else and how they would do it. What is the weight of their body?
Part of your question was to Willem. What was that?
Physical demands, if I remember. Yeah. One interesting thing about this work with Bob is along those lines of he doesn't like anything natural, he also doesn't like things casual. So everything is always under tension, always a little lifted. So you're never relaxing. It's always held up. If you've got a hand, you don't have a relaxed hand. You've got a hand that has a life to it, an intention to it. So I think it's to create the possibility that anything can happen. You're like a spring. You always have this possibility that you're going to go. Because everything's held down and not relaxed. So that's an interesting way to perform, because often in films, often in naturalism, one of the keys to, inhabiting the character is relaxing, finding a kind of behavior that, is a gesture that can get you to that character.
Yeah, this is about more like animal behavior. Like Kleist said, a good actor is like a bear.
Who said that?
Kleist said
good.
he will never strike first. He'll always wait for you to move.
I think of myself as a jackrabbit.
With long ears and a bushy tail.
You have a question over here?
Yeah, I'm struck by what you said about the piece of meat on the stage, because my question has to do with, I've worked with a lot of performance artists and I've worked with a lot of actors. I've done both, and I've spent a few years with Joan Jonas doing her piece as a performance piece, using it as a theater piece. Mm-hmm. And I'm just wondering, is this piece of Marina's, would you call it a performance piece or would you call it a theater piece? Or do you find that to be sort of spurious? Because there's something about the real piece of meat on the stage that is, there's something about what you said that I felt when she said, horrified that there's not a real piece of meat on the stage, because there's something that the performance artist looks for as a piece of art as opposed to it being different in theater. It's something I've been going back and forth in, but it interests me a lot, and that's why this piece interests me, because the bringing together of the performance artist and the theater work is, I think, really, really great a thing to do.
Well, performance art is different because there's so many different artists, but I think generally speaking, my perception of a performance artist, it's dealing with things that are very real. And a formal theater also deals with things that are very real, but we go about it in a different way. So a formal theater for me, I don't know if you've seen The Life and Death of Marina, but I can say, you must pay the rent. I can't pay the rent. You must pay the rent. I can't pay the rent. So that's one way of doing formal theater. You know that the actor is acting, and he knows he's acting. Like Ivan the Terrible, he's acting so evil. He's having fun, and we know that he's not taking himself seriously, thinking, So a formal theater can say, okay, I touched the crystal of my watch, and it's cool. That's truth. And I don't have to outwardly express it. I feel it. And that is my expression. I can touch my forehead, and it's warmer. That's truth. And I don't have to outwardly express it. I feel it. And that is my expression. So formal theater goes back and forth that way. But to me, when it works best, it's always about a certain truth. And I think performance theater, can be that. A Marina takes a razor blade and cuts her body. She sits on a block of ice. It's real ice, and it's real. It's just we go about it in a different way.
Thank you. You have a question over here?
Hi, this is a question for Mr. Wilson, and it's related to to your past in the visual arts and just the influence of the visual arts on your work. I've only been to actually 2 operas, or I don't know if I'd call yesterday's performance an opera, but it was Einstein on the Beach and What I Saw Yesterday. And I'm just wondering, they look like surrealist tableaus or visual, they're paintings brought to life, and I was just wondering if you could talk about the influence of surrealism, if that is an extra influence, and just of the visual arts on your work as a somewhat outsider, it seems, in the opera.
Well, when I first came to New York from Texas, I'd never been to the theater. And I went to see Broadway plays, and I didn't like them, and I still don't, for the most part. And I went to the Metropolitan Opera, and I didn't like that either, and I still don't, for the most part. And then I saw the work of George Balanchine in the New York City Ballet, and I liked that very much, and I still like it. I liked it because it was classical in its form and its construction. I liked it because it was formal. There was a certain distance between the material and the performer and what he was doing, and the way he danced for himself first, not insisting too much on the public's attention. Then I saw the work of Merce Cunningham and John Cage, and I liked that very much. And I still do. I liked it because what I saw is what I saw, and what I heard was what I heard, and often what I was hearing was something completely different from what I was seeing, and that the music was put together with the dance, often on the first time on the first night. So it was by chance that I find a relationship between what I was hearing and what I was seeing. And in particular, the works of Balanchine, I like the abstract ones. And the same with Merce, that it was time-space constructions. It was abstract. And that was completely different from what was happening on Broadway and what was happening at the opera. And Einstein on the Beach, as you know, as you saw it, is a time-space construction. So there's really no narrative. It's something you can freely associate with. And it's abstract in its construction. It's based on ideas of Einstein, but it doesn't follow any one narrative. And in putting together The Life and Death of Marina, it's a time-space construction. So we start with Marina as a little girl. Okay, So there I do it, you must pay the rent. I can't pay the rent. You see the little girl, it's very exaggerated, right? And there's this very beautiful moment that Willem does in the second half, where he's just reading from newspaper that has this very deep emotion that's not outwardly expressed. But it's, there are many different scenes, but it's a time-space construction that is very abstract in some ways. It's a theme and variation. It's really nothing new. People said, oh, Einstein was something radical and new. It's not. It's a very classical form. It's in 4 acts with 3 themes that repeat 3 times, with variations. It's theme and variation. But because in opera world, it did not tell a story. It was not narrative. And for visual references, I don't know, the world's a library. So I took things from everywhere. At that time when I made it in the mid-70s, Patty Hearst was in the news, so we took Patty Hearst. Or, I took this, and I don't know, it can be something from the past, from history. I had just been to the Metropolitan Museum and had seen a 10th century Persian bowl. And I couldn't get it out of my head, so I put it in the play.
We have time for 1 or maybe 2, so what would you have to...
Pardon?
No, I'm talking to the guy at the mic.
Hi, my question is for Mr. Wilson. I'm an aspiring actor and director, and I'm kind of at a point in my life where I'm trying to figure out which path to take. And I know you studied architecture, but you didn't actually study theater as far as I'm aware. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on gaining experience through schooling in theater versus gaining experience through working.
Well, I met Martha Graham, the American choreographer, when I was 21, 22. And she said, Mr. Wilson, what do you want to do in life? I said, I have no idea. And she said, well, if you work long enough and hard enough, you'll find something. And so 9 times out of 10, you think, oh my God, this will never work. But you just keep working. And I don't know, it's, you never learn anything, you're always learning, but do it. And if you're interested in theater, I started out, I produced my own works, I designed them, I acted in them, I directed them, so I learned something about box office, marketing, all aspects of the theater. And so I think if you're working, whether it's an actor or a director, it's very important to know something about light, to know something about technically. I'm not a technician. I don't understand things technically, but I know that if I go into a theater, I must have a good relationship with the technical director. So all aspects. If I had gone to a school to study theater, I would never be making the kind of theater I'm making. It happened by living. I was walking down the street and I met an Afro-American deaf-mute boy who had never been to school and knew no words, and I wrote my first play with him. There was silence. My first play with text was written with Christopher Knowles, an autistic boy who'd been in an institution for 11 years in Schenectady, New York. These are the sort of things that would have never happened at Harvard, American Repertory Theater, at Yale. It was by living every day. And those experiences, I think having seen a painting of Jackson Pollock changed my whole way of thinking about time and space. So living is very important. And as I said, the world is a library.
Great, thank you.
Listen, on that note, I think we're going to have to cut it off. It's 3:30 on the nose, but thank you both very much. Thank you.